My name is Bill Nichols. I'm the founding director of CULTR, and I'd like to thank you for being here with us today. I'd like to briefly highlight the purpose of this event and its evolution over the last several years. Since its inception, the purpose of this event was to connect K-12 education, higher education, and language studies with industry. Over the years, GLLM, as we call this event internally, has served as a space of convergence for diverse industry leaders from business, nonprofit, government, and education to discuss the importance of language learning and cultural competence as essential skills for an emerging global workforce. We've had the privilege of welcoming speakers such as Angela Jackson from New Profit in 2021, Tim Mahoney from General Motors in 2019, and Seema Jain, who in 2018 was the Director of Multicultural Affairs for Marriott. All of the videos for past GLLM events are on our website, and you'll find the link in the chat. This year's GLLM reflects the evolution from speakers in education and language advocacy to those in intercultural competence, educational philanthropy, to this in this new sphere uniting hospitality, gastronomy, culinary arts, cultural competence, entrepreneurship, and of course, language studies. This event also signals the approach of CULTR's third cycle of funding. We've submitted our application to the Department of Education, and now we're just waiting word to hear about funding for the next 4 years. And with the incoming funding, there will be a change and a transition in leadership. As I mentioned, I'm the founding director, and I'd like to now introduce the incoming director for CULTR, Dr. Hakeem Lee, who is a close friend and colleague, and is an assistant professor here at Georgia State and the director of the Korean program here at Georgia State in the Department of World Languages and Cultures. She will introduce our speakers and provide questions about the Q&A. Hakeem, take it away.
Thank you, Bill. I join you in welcoming everyone to this event, which is being presented for the second time virtually. And we really look forward to hosting this event in its original formats, networking luncheon, again in the near future. So I invite you to sign up for our newsletter to stay informed. So you can do so via the link in the chat if you check the chat box. And we will use the chat to provide you with the useful links throughout the event. So rather than the chat, please use the Q&A icon to the right of the chat icon to submit your questions later. So as an incoming director, I'm excited to share the focus of the new funding cycle as per the mandate from our sponsor, the U.S. Department of Education. The priority of the next 4 years, next cycle, is an intentional focus on less commonly taught languages, or the LCTLs, as they commonly known in educational or academic context. So LCTLs probably broadly refers to all languages other than French, German, and Spanish. So now a few details before I introduce the speakers. I'd like to remind everyone that the discussion is being recorded and will be available on CULTR website and our YouTube channel after the event. And you can also see the links and links are in the chat. So all attendees will remain muted with camera off throughout the entire session. And discussion of approximately 35 minutes will be followed by a Q&A with you, and you may submit your questions throughout the course of the discussion and after the Q&A box by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A icon is located to the right of the chat icon, as you can see. And also, if you like questions you see, click the thumbs up icon to promote these questions to the top of the list. So we'll prioritize the questions. The Q&A will conclude at 1 p.m. and from 1 to 1:30, you are invited to network individual meetings for which you will register. And instructions for the networking session as well as the links will be provided in the chat box, and again after the Q&A. Okay, so we are very honored to welcome two Japanese speakers today. Our keynote speaker is Chef Ivan Orkin, the owner of the restaurant Ivan Ramen in New York City. And our guest moderator, who we are equally delighted to welcome, is Jessica Cork, the Vice President of Community Engagement and Corporate Communications at YKK Corporation of America, and also the chair of the Japanese American Society of Georgia. So rather than me reading their extensive bios, I will allow each of them to introduce themselves to you in today's discussion. Jessica and Ivan, thank you very much for being with us today. And now I turn it over to you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Minasan konnichiwa. I'm super excited today to get to talk with Ivan, and I have just a million questions to ask you. But first, I guess I'll just briefly introduce myself and my own Japan journey, and then we can take a deeper dive into your story. So again, so my name is Jessica Cork, and I work for YKK Corporation of America. For those of you who are not aware, YKK is one of the biggest zipper manufacturers in the world. We make over 10 billion zippers per year in 72 countries, and our headquarters are in Japan. So my job actually requires me to speak Japanese pretty much every day. I work for the North America Group headquarters in Atlanta. So my office covers all of the countries from Canada to Argentina. So in addition to Japanese, I do have opportunity to use my rudimentary French and Spanish on occasion as well. I've been interested in Japan since I was about 8 years old when I first went to Japan to do a homestay. And that was back when I was in high school. And I went on to get a BA in Japanese language and literature from the University of Massachusetts, and then an MA in Japanese from the University of Sheffield. And then prior to working to YKK, I spent 11 years working for the Japanese consulate in Atlanta as the advisor for educational and cultural affairs. And before that, I spent 3 years working as a coordinator for international relations on the JET program in Hiroshima Prefecture, Japan. And as was mentioned, two of the volunteer activities I'm super proud of, one being chair of the Japan America Society of Georgia. If you are in Georgia, we have a ton of activities going on all the time, so I would definitely encourage you to join. And I'm also part of the governing board of International Charter Academy of Georgia, which is Georgia's first Japanese English dual language immersion school for K-5 kids. I have 4 kids myself, all of whom I have been attempting to teach Japanese as best I can. They have attended bilingual immersion schools in the Atlanta area. And I also really love to travel. I'm at 25 countries and counting right now and can't wait to be able to get on a plane again to go somewhere exciting. So with that, I want to turn the discussion now over to Ivan. So can you tell us a bit first about what inspired you to learn Japanese?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and pretty honored to have Jessica pelting me with questions. So, yeah, you know, when I was a boy, my whole life since I was very, very young, I was obsessed with food and all things food related. And so when I turned 15, there was a new Japanese restaurant that opened up in my little town. I mean, I live in the suburbs of New York City, so. You know, there was many ethnic restaurants, but this was in the late 70s, so it was still kind of new. And I got a job as a dishwasher there. And the thing that I think struck me was how kind everybody was. I was just sort of a snot-nosed 15-year-old kid. And I would ride my bike from school to do my dishwashing job, and I was always hungry. And the chef, without batting an eye, kind of grabbed an egg, whipped it up, a raw egg, poured it on some hot white rice, added some aonori on top, and then kind of a little soy sauce, and kind of thrust it into my hands. And I was a polite boy, so I didn't, and I did say I was hungry, so I ate it. And I was surprised at how much I liked it. And I think they were surprised at how quickly I ate it. And from that point on, they were, you know, we had kind of a good, fast, warm relationship. And so then I was just sort of really interested in just listening to the way everybody spoke Japanese. I loved the food. It was very intriguing. And when I went to college at the University of Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder, I had never finished my language requirement in high school. And so I had to choose a language, and I chose Japanese, which nowadays seems like, well, what's the big deal? But in 1983, it was actually not that easy to find a school that offered Japanese language. I liked the major. It was kind of oddly easy for me, and I liked it a lot. I was very interested in it, and I decided to make it my major. Sort of a lifelong love affair and obsession with Japan started.
I love how you describe food as being your entry point into a culture, and it's also, you said it's a sushi restaurant. So what kind of impressed you a bit about what went on kind of behind the scenes there? I hear, for example, that you have to spend a really long time learning how to wash the rice, and it's very, there's a lot behind making sushi. So did you notice any cultural differences kind of right off the bat?
Well, once again, I was really young and I didn't know anything. And I was just a dishwasher, so the only food I touched was dirty food. So, but I guess, no, I have to be honest and say I didn't really notice any of those things. But what I did notice was just how different everything was. I didn't grow up in a house, unfortunately, of people that loved food, and I grew up in a Jewish house, but not with a real Jewish mom. So I didn't have someone constantly shoving food in my mouth. And so one of the first times in my life really was at this restaurant where, I just remember, I remember opening the door every afternoon to go to work, and just the billows of the smell of soy sauce and mirin and sake and dashi. And I got so used to that smell, and they were always, tapping with their knives, and they were making all these delicious things. And every day we would all sit down together for a family meal. And the more I showed them that I would eat anything they gave me, the more I ate. And I ate everything. I ate, raw fish and raw meat, and just anything that they put on the table, I ate. And maybe that was also where my palate started to really grow. And I think from a lot of us who fall in love with another culture, I think food is a very important part of it.
I'm actually really impressed to hear, that at age 15, you would happily eat something that had raw egg in it and stuff, because I remember doing my homestay in Japan also at age 15, and I was an extremely picky eater at that point, and not knowing anything that was being put in front of me, and being very apprehensive, about trying things. But I think, learning to try things and learning to enjoy things was part of, a good growing experience for me, and really getting to understand the culture. But did you start out pretty much with an open mind? So you just said whatever was put in front of you, you didn't have any worries about eating anything, you just tried everything? You know what?
I've been hungry for 59 years. And I say no to almost no food, not then and not now. And I don't know. By the time I was 16 or 17, I mostly only ate oily raw fish. I'd be like, I only want the kohara and the saba and whatever else is like stinky and oily. So yeah, maybe I'm a little weird.
Gotcha. So tell us a little bit more about your journey discovering what you wanted to do with your life. So obviously you had this early interest in food, but when did you decide that you wanted to become a chef?
Well, it's funny because I suppose I'm like many liberal arts majors. You don't. Being a liberal arts major is more about either stumbling into something or being passionate about something obscure that doesn't make money. And so when I graduated, I don't think I really knew what I wanted to do. I graduated in 87, and within 2 years, the bubble burst. And there wasn't, Jetro and all that stuff. They weren't begging people to come to Japan anymore. It was, things had really changed. So the whole Japanese language opportunity kind of dried up a little bit. But it's okay, because I wasn't that person looking for those jobs anyhow. I had just always wanted to. I was always interested in food, but I grew up in Long Island in an upscale town in the 70s and 80s. So becoming a chef wasn't something that everybody was excited about. I always joke that now in 2022, if you're at a party and you say you're a chef, everybody wants to talk to you. But if in 1983, if you said you were a chef, nobody really wants to talk to you. So it's become a sexy job. So I had a couple of false starts with work and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then one day I just had an epiphany and I realized it was time to make a big decision. And I went to culinary school. I went to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. Funny enough, I didn't end up working in any Japanese restaurants because they don't really, even now, I mean, it's you walk into a Japanese restaurant that's run by Japanese people and they don't necessarily throw their arms open and say, hey, come work with us. And so I was always very intimidated about asking for a job at a Japanese restaurant. And so I ended up cooking French food, and like a lot of CIA grads. Everything changed when I went to live in Japan with my family, and I started to sort of think about what I want to do with my life, living in Tokyo. And after several years, the obvious thing was something in food.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about that experience then. So you moved to Japan with your family, and then tell us how, I just can't even fathom how you went about opening up a ramen restaurant in Japan. So please tell us that full story about why ramen, why, I'm sure there were false starts and trepidation about many different things. So.
Well, the funny thing for me, and I always, because of course, yes, the first question everybody asks is what a monumental thing to do, and you're amazing, and what guts, and blah blah blah. And I guess sure, I mean, I'll take a little credit. It did take a little bit of chutzpah to do that, but I'm a real expat. In my mind, I belong in Japan. Like I just, I've spoken the language relatively well for a long time. My children are half Japanese. We didn't live in the Roppongi area around lots of foreigners. We lived in a suburb. All our neighbors, I was the Gaijin family. There was nobody else. Every Japanese neighborhood has a little booklet that has all the activities in the area and the household that's supposed to be responsible for taking out the garbage and for doing all those things. And I was the one, because I'm more of the housewife than my wife. And so I dealt with all those things. And so anyway, my point is I was sort of living in Japan as a Japanese guy. And so when we decided to open a ramen shop, so I was sort of spinning my wheels. My wife was working. I didn't know what to do with my life. And finally she said, she was like, listen, you need a project. And so we started talking. And at the time, the ramen boom was really picking up steam. There were ramen shops everywhere. Every TV show had a little corner about ramen. And I was obsessed. I was eating ramen at least 2 or 3 days a week. I'm a trained classical chef, but ramen is like throwing lots of crap in a pot, as far as I could tell. And so I was intrigued at how to do it. And, my wife said to me, why don't you open a ramen shop? And I was like, well, that's crazy. I don't know how to make ramen. And I don't want to go work in a little ramen joint after being a trained classical chef in 4-star New York restaurants. It's like working in a burger shop. And so I didn't really know how to proceed, but she convinced me that I would figure it out. And like I said, I kind of really felt like I belonged there. And I guess I almost refer to it now as this great anthropological opportunity. Like all these years, I'd been, and this is great because I'm talking to people just like me, people that love language and they're intrigued by it, but it's uncomfortable because how do you find your way? How do you fit? And for the longest time, I didn't feel like I fit. And up until the Ivan Ramen sort of epiphany, I was looking around Tokyo, seeing all these different people from wherever, from Africa and from Spain and from America, and these people that had interesting companies. And I was like, well, how do they do it? Like, how do you get started? I don't get it. But, ultimately, once I decided I wanted to do this business, I realized, I was married, so I had the right to work. I had a working visa. I had spent my whole life learning culturally about Japanese people and how they feel and think. I've been learning the language for so long. And all of a sudden, everything started to kind of come together. And I had my wife, who is really the mastermind. Most wives are the mastermind. She was the mastermind behind everything. And she would explain to me, hey, you're opening this new in this new neighborhood. Let's go to all the neighbors and give a little present, and let's explain what you're going to do so that nobody feels like you're just kind of barging into their area and taking over. And so I dutifully went to all my new neighbors and I gave them a small gift, and I explained, and I said, hey, if there's any noise or mess or smell, here's my number, call me immediately, I'll fix it. I'm really excited, and, in a Japanese way, I said, please, yoroshiku onegaishimasu, I'm gonna do my best. And people really accepted me. And I mean, I'm a glass half full guy. So I have a lot of faith in people. And I think when you're nice to people and respectful of their cultures and their language, many people are quite welcoming. And when you hear about not being welcomed, I really believe a lot of the time it's because you're a bit of a jerk and you're not taking into consideration what it's like to be a guest. And I'm also like you, Jessica. I'm a big traveler and I love traveling, and I have nothing but good experiences. But when I travel, I'm also very, very respectful, and I try my best to be a guest. And so in Tokyo, as you know, I mean, it's really weird to be a guest and yet also sort of a resident in Japan and Asia, I think in general, and more than being in a Western country. Obviously, your face looks different and your language is different, and so you kind of stick out, I guess is what I'm saying. And so it can be. We always joke. The foreigners always joke, right? Because you always have your gaijin card in the back pocket. When meaning, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it's frustrating because many times you're not included. They'll say, "Well, you're a gaijin, you wouldn't understand," and you're like, "I'm standing here and I'm speaking Japanese. I think I understand," but that happens a lot, and I've accepted it. This is many years now, so I accept that. But then on the flip side, every once in a while, I pull out my metaphorical gaijin card and I say, I don't really understand. Sorry. And they say, well, he's a gaijin, he doesn't understand. So, it's funny when you choose a different country to live in and how you decide to make your way. But like I said, for me, I really made my way by learning how to behave, and then doing what anybody does in any business, right? I tried to make the most delicious ramen I can possibly think of. I tried to make a warm and inviting atmosphere. I tried to be the best ramen shop in Tokyo, which my wife said, you're crazy, because when we opened, I said, we're going to be the best new ramen shop in Tokyo. And she said, that's ludicrous. And I said, well, what's the point of doing it if we're not going to try to be the best? So there's a lot of ramen shops, so I'm not going to claim to have been the best, but I think we did a very nice job.
Yeah, that was something I was really interested to ask you regarding ramen specifically, because, as I just mentioned, foods like sushi, or there's certain Japanese foods that I feel like Japanese may feel strongly there's one proper way to make it. Like I took tea ceremony lessons for years, and there's one, proper way to do tea ceremony, and you don't deviate. So what is it about ramen specifically, I guess, that it seems to me like it allows that experimentation or deviation? Like, I understand you put rye flour into your noodles, which is something that Japanese chefs, typically don't do. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, is ramen different from other types of Japanese foods?
Well, that's such a fantastic question. Thank you. It's funny because you're totally right. And ramen, I like to think I coined the phrase that ramen is the maverick cuisine of Japan. It's the one. Well, first of all, years ago when I suggested that ramen was a cuisine, I got a lot of pushback. For sure, sushi is made one way, soba is made one way, tempura is made one way, and there are no other ways. And I agree with you. Ramen is the one thing that there are no cookbooks. There are now. I wrote one. And now there's more, but 15, 16, 17 years ago when I started doing all this, there was nothing. But it was the one thing that I noticed about ramen shops. First of all, think of a ramen shop. Of all like Ivan Ramen, we're chefy, we're artisanal, we're kodawari, right? We search for this unique ingredients and things like that. But a ramen shop is really like a burger joint. It's not that much different. Meaning that for every one shop that does all those amazing things and uses special eggs and chickens, there's 100 or 1,000 shops that are kind of just, average. They use frozen things from a big supplier. They reheat things. They add water to things. Like anything. I'm not criticizing it. It's like any fast food. But I joined sort of this one sort of group of Kodawari ramen, the ramen shops that search for that special thing that makes it unique. But anyway, what I noticed was I went to a bonenkai, right, the end of year drinking party for all ramen shop owners, all the up and coming ramen shop owners, and I was invited, which was very exciting. But you know, most of these guys, they were wearing ripped jeans and t-shirts, and they all had like scraggly beards, and if you went to a French chef society bonenkai, everybody would be in suits and ties, and would have been totally different. So I was like, this is kind of cool. But I knew that was a really great thing to do with the ramen, and that's not really why I chose ramen. I really genuinely chose ramen because I was very interested in ramen. But I knew that, you know, there were two things I knew that was a kind of a hook, and that my wife kind of gave me a wink and a nod, was that, you know, nobody takes ramen serious really anyway. So, you know, a white guy making ramen, it's like, well, so, okay, you know, it's ramen. And there's no rules, and there's this, it's just an easy thing to sort of start. Also, you know, ramen shops in Japan, the taste of the ramen is very important. Obviously, the popular shops are genuinely tasty, but you'll notice that the shops that are the most popular, or a majority of them, have a charismatic owner, or they have a very, very unique concept. You know, whatever it is, everything is cooked on a special stone, or everything is, you know, there's a big bone hanging in the window, or whatever it is. There's always something. And so for me, I also knew that my hook, for better or worse, was that I was a white fella from New York opening a ramen shop in the middle of Tokyo, and I knew that people would come. And then, of course, I also been in the business for 30 years, so I also knew that if it wasn't good, they would all laugh and high five and say, "See, I told you it would taste like ketchup," because that's what they all wrote. They said, "Oh, we're going to that Ivan Ramen to see what ketchup soup tastes like," you know, and because my wife would read all of sort of the underground, sort of the Reddit of Japan, you know, and see what all the buzz was. And there was all kinds of conspiracy theories behind my shop, you know, that I was, you know, some Japanese guy was actually cooking all the food, and I was just the guy standing there, and there was all kinds of things. But, you know, the one great thing about, and just to address how exciting this project was, is that, you know, in Japan, like in America, in this country anyway, you know, the restaurants with giant menus with 1,000 options, and 100 seats or 500 seats is the norm. But in Japan, you know, a 10 to 20 seat restaurant is more the norm. Doing 1 or 2 or 3 things really, really well is very respected. So as in America, if you have a 3-item menu, people kind of wonder what's wrong with you or why it's a bad shop. But in Japan, people are intrigued, and they're like, "Wow, you make that one thing so well, I gotta try it." And that was also part of what made me want to have a ramen shop. As a chef, I thought, how amazing to just concentrate on this one thing and just work on it over and over again until you nail it. You get it right, and then every day trying to make it perfectly over and over again. And even though some ramen shop owners may be ragtag, maybe they're not the real deal, the guys who are good, they're as serious as any other great chef, and they really take pride in what they do. They really do search for that special salt, or that's really amazing chicken from some great farm up north, or whatever. And it's a lot of fun as a craftsperson. It's a real shokunin kind of experience. And for me, sort of going through that whole process, and once again, I'm brash because I think I belong, even though, as you know, Jessica, I imagine your Japanese is just crazy good, but every once in a while you feel like, what did he just say? Or what was that expression? And then they roll their eyes like, oh, the guy doesn't understand. And you're like, well, I do. I just don't happen to know that one phrase. But but I like to say that for me, I think is why I love being an expat so much. I'm very ADHD. And I think that when you live in a foreign culture, or if you interact with the foreign culture, you're always a little off balance. And I kind of like that, because I discovered, you know, I'm not so young anymore. And the one thing I've really discovered in my life is that being uncomfortable is when big things happen. When you're comfortable, very, very, very rare that you have some fantastic thing happen when you're super comfortable. It's more when you're uncomfortable. And when I was living in Japan, almost every day, something would happen that would knock me off my balance. And I would be like, I didn't understand that. Or I would do something and someone would be annoyed with me and I wouldn't understand why they were annoyed with me. And my wife would have to explain, well, you did this and that's not really correct. And I'd be like, oh, okay, I didn't realize. And so it's, I think for some people that might be off-putting. For me, I think it's what's driven me all these years. And I really love that feeling of constant discovery and then I guess the one thing you have to be open to is accepting the fact that maybe you'll never really get it completely. I know I've met some language people that are just, and like when I was in college, there was a couple kids, they would just, by the end of the first year, they were fluent and it was really annoying. And I've never been that guy. I have a really good ear, so I think my pronunciation is quite good. And then I love talking, so I just keep talking even if I don't know what the heck I'm talking about, and it just somehow works. But I'm so happy that somehow I figured out how to make it all work because. And I said, today I discovered a new a kanji study site. The one thing I'm ashamed to admit is that after college, I sort of lost touch with writing and reading. And I lived in Japan for 10 years with basically a first grader or second grader's knowledge of reading. And it was very shameful for me. And so for the last 2 years, I study kanji almost every morning and I'm actually starting to really read. And for a guy in America who reads a tremendous amount, it's weird to not read when you're living in different countries. So that's my, for those of you who are doing Japanese, don't stop up on the reading. The reading's so important. It seems daunting, but it's important.
I'm so glad to hear you say that right now about the importance. I mean, that shows the importance of really being a lifelong learner, right? Like your language study doesn't stop when you graduate from college. Like you're saying that you're still studying kanji now after having lived in Japan for so long. So that's really great to hear. And I think also it takes a certain amount of maintenance too, right? To be able to keep up with it because you can lose some of your language ability.
Even my wife. I mean, my wife forgets kanji. I mean, it's and now with the if you write, you don't really need to write kanji anymore. You write out hiragana and you choose a kanji. So it's even right. I can write emails in Japanese. It's not
right, exactly. Just typing. Yeah, you forget how to handwrite for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. And we're going to open it up to the audience for some questions in about 10 minutes. But I do want to move over a little bit into developing intercultural awareness. And so I'd kind of like to hear, what your strategy was for becoming really comfortable with your life in Japan. So some people try to completely immerse themselves and almost become Japanese. And then others just get really comfortable with being themselves, with sort of like modifying their behavior. But like, what was your strategy to get beyond the place where, at the beginning, I think everyone feels culture shock, and your immediate reaction sometimes to culture shock is to want to completely try to change yourself to fit in perfectly, which usually not possible. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I actually think I've lived in Japan kind of off and on for many years. This last time I lived, it was almost 10 years that we lived there. And quite frankly, it's kind of a stupid, obvious answer. I mean, I think the more you're engaged in Japanese speaking, the easier it is. I think as I was saying, the first couple of years, my wife worked. I took care of the children. I got up early. I made the bentos. I had dinner ready. She was an interior stylist. I would drive her around to jobs and hang out with her during the day. But I also had like a VoIP phone that I could pick up, and it was a 718 Brooklyn number, and I could call my friends. And I listened to NPR, all things considered in the morning, and whatever. I definitely don't shy away from my English language life. But when I opened Ivan Ramen, when I started opening Ivan Ramen, all of a sudden, I was doing everything myself. In the very beginning, I was very shy about making phone calls, about calling distributors, and I would often ask someone to do it for me. And then I had like a very New York moment where I had a guy who wanted to work with us who I really didn't like, and I wanted my wife to tell him to in a New York way. And she just did it in a Japanese way. She apologized and she said how sorry she was. And then he called and he yelled at me. And I just said to my wife, you know what, no more. I do all the calls. Nobody does anything for me anymore. And I'll figure it out. And because I'm very Japanese in how I communicate, in the sense I understand what works and what doesn't work. So, you know, communicating in an American way doesn't get you anywhere. But at the same time, I'm still can be a New Yorker and get my point across. And I got really good at that. And so, and I got good at it by getting on the phone and, you know, calling all my own vendors, making my own relationships. I trained my own staff. I did my own health inspections. I did everything myself. And the more you do it, the more you get comfortable. And as I said, anyway, you know what? I really felt like I belonged. And so for me, I just, when I'm in Japan, you know, I feel like it's my town. I know what's going on. And even before the Ivan Ramen project started, I think that I was just comfortable. You know, one thing I discovered about myself is I lived there as a young man teaching English, and I was never quite comfortable. And then we moved back with my family, my 2 children and my wife, and all of a sudden I was super comfortable. So for me, what I realized about myself is the old proverbial, you know, wherever you hang your hat is home. And I think I discovered that having my wife with me and my children made me completely comfortable. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, well, this is where I live now. This is my home. And, you know, I mean, nowadays with the internet, and I mean, you can watch the latest TV show, you can read the latest book, you can download a Kindle book, you can do anything you want. And listen, when I went there in the 80s, I remember, you know, for a while there, I wouldn't speak English, and I would meet an American and I would answer him in Japanese. And I'd say, sorry, I don't, you know, if you want to speak in Japanese, I'll speak to you. Otherwise, I'm not really interested in a relationship with you right now. So that's a little extreme and obnoxious, but, you know, it can work. And, but I really do think that it's easy to hide in your little apartment and to, you know, not engage. And I think maybe that's the biggest hurdle, is to absolutely, you have to like I said, it was easier for me because I came with a Japanese wife who, you know, really helped support me in all those things. And for some of those who are planning to live in another country, they may be all by themselves. But, you know, it's like, I sound like my mother, you know, you got to join a club, you got to go to whatever, right? You got to go to a bar and sit with people and chat, you know, and of course the famous, you know, finding a partner, you know, to date, which is the super secret way to be very fluent very quickly.
Right. Well, I think you brought up an interesting point, though, about personal relationships for sure, because I would think in some ways being married to a Japanese person would ease your transition. But on the other hand, I would think you would have to make extra effort to try to force yourself to do things on your own, because I do know some people who are married to a Japanese spouse who it kind of allows the spouse to do everything. You know, they don't interact at all with people, you know, outside in the community because language skills or nervous about it. So was there this sense of just trying to, I mean, you mentioned just, I won't say you had to force yourself, but you decided at one point that you're just going to take action and be the one who has those interactions versus relying on your wife for everything.
Well, I mean, my wife was busy. And like I said, I'm much more of the Oba-san than my wife. So meaning I'm much more of an auntie. And if you see me chatting, I'll be chatting in the middle of a bunch of middle-aged women laughing and having a really good time. And so I'm actually much better than my wife is at managing all those things. And so I would meet with the neighbors, and, you know, like I said, you'd have the Gomi Toban, which is the day, you know, my house is responsible for, in Japan, they have nets that cover the garbage from the crows, and it has to be kept. The Japanese are completely insane about garbage. I have a section in my book about dealing with garbage. I mean, it's just traumatizing. We once mixed the recycle accidentally into our regular garbage, and the garbage men came to our door, knocked on the door, opened the bag, and yelled at us and said, "What is this?" And of course, the New Yorker would have told them to go, you know, screw themselves. But the Japanese guy with me, I was like, "I'm so sorry," and we bowed really low, and we promised we would never let that happen again. It was a very Japanese moment. You know, I think that for me, I'm very comfortable in those situations. But like I also said, I mean, except for some of you freaks who completely become, you know, just become the Spanish person or a Japanese person completely, for most of us, it's always, you're always missing. You're always something you don't quite get. There's always something that you're striving towards. And there's always going to be a person, no matter what you do, no matter how well you do it, they're going to judge you and say, yeah, you know, he doesn't get it. I think to be an expat, you have to have a thick skin and you have to remember that you're a guest. Being a guest is the number one thing to me. I mean, you're a guest, you know, you don't question their laws. In the same way, if someone comes to New York to visit and they start moaning about New York, I'm like, hey, pal, get on a plane, get out. I don't need you here. You know, you're in my city now. I don't want you. And I'm actually, when someone complains about New York, I'm offended. I really am, because I love New York. I know it's not a perfect town, but I think it's a pretty great one. And if you want to visit it, then take it as it is and do your best. And I don't want to hear about it, you know? And I think that we all feel that way. We all love where we live, and we take a lot of pride in it. And so why would you think a person you're in a country you're visiting would be happy if you criticize them? It's not. It's just it's counterintuitive. And anyway, the Japanese people are really nice. And I'm once again, I'm a huge fan. It's a fun place. It is a little hard to fit in. It's hard to find your group. I haven't totally figured it out, but there always seems to be someone, and there always seems to be something or some way to find it. And I actually don't know anybody who's gone to Japan that hasn't come away in love. So I think all countries have their things that are difficult and all things that are not. And yeah, so for me, I leaned into the responsibilities that ended up working out for me. And somehow, I mean, you know, if it wasn't for the earthquake, I think I'd still be in Japan. It just, the earthquake kind of rankled everything and made a lot of changes and ended up opening up a window to leave, and we left. But it was a really good time.
Okay, great. So the takeaway on that one, to remember that you're a guest when in a foreign country, and to live your life that way. Great advice. We do have a few questions from the audience. The first question, do you have any recommendations for accurate online dictionaries or any for Japanese slang or phrases?
Well, the one I use right now that I was discussing, that I study, it's a web, I don't know how new it is, but it's called WaniKani, and wanikani.com. It's like, I don't even know, it's cheap. It's like $10 a month. I think you can, but in the end of the year, every year they do a lifetime membership, like $200 for forever. It's a lot of fun. It's sort of almost like a game, and you just go. It's for kanji. It's not for grammar. It's for kanji. So it's you know, they have a different kanji. It also has phrases, and it's really fun. I mean, it seems a lot of people who don't speak Japanese also use it. I find that a little bit difficult to understand, but it's it has 60 levels. I'm almost at level 20, and I think I'm like in 5th or 6th grade now. But I also have like this, you know, I have this fractured memory of kanji, because at one point I supposedly knew, you know, 2000. So at least I wrote an essay and graduated. So. But it really does kind of go away pretty quickly if you don't stick with it. So anyway, my recommendation is WaniKani. I will also say that the online community for studying Japanese is massive. It's nothing like it was when I was a kid. And there's so many sites that have things you can read and different kinds of grammar and there's all kinds of stuff out there. So I encourage you to take a look. But if you're working on kanji, WaniKani is really fantastic.
That's great. And it sounds like it makes it fun to do too. Is that helpful in kind of keeping the motivation up?
Yeah, well, no, yeah, you feel this challenge to learn them, the way they quiz. It's just basically quizzes, you know, lots and lots of quizzes. The only negative thing is if you don't do it mostly every day, it keeps adding up. So like I've been at 700 quizzes for the last 4 weeks because I got busy and I let it get away from me. And now it's like 5 hours of just getting back to zero. But when I stay on it, you know, every 2 or 3 weeks, I go up another level. So I'm really enjoying it, but like I said, I'm maybe you're all like me. I mean, I'm genuinely a Japanese language geek. I never really thought about myself that way, but I'm pretty intrigued. I mean, I speak it every day because my wife and I speak Japanese every day. But it's so interesting. There's just constant new stuff to learn.
Right. All right, next question is about how have you been able to navigate the pandemic chaos with closings, current challenges in staff retention, and difficulties with getting food items easily? How have you been able to bounce back?
Well, it's been horrible. You know, the whole world's a mess. Of course, I get products from a country far away with boats that aren't moving, and you know, airlifting products makes them much more expensive. But you know, I like to say to people that I'm an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs shouldn't complain. So it's yes, the pandemic was a particularly tough time, but I think that when you're in a small business, that's what being a small business owner is. When things are good, you make tons of money and you don't complain about it. So when things are bad and you don't make any money, you really shouldn't complain too much about it either. You know, successful business people constantly are figuring out how to straddle this craziness. This was particularly difficult. You know, we're still suffering. You know, it's difficult to get products. You know, a lot of us in the restaurant industry, we really don't have millions of dollars in the bank, so we had to lay off a lot of our staff. At my restaurant, we kept delivery, so we were able to keep our core team of back of the house, of cooks, dishwashers, things like that. The front of the house was harder, unfortunately, although we've had a bunch of them come back. And I'd say the saddest thing for me about the pandemic is that just a lot of people left my industry, and I really like my industry. It's a really good one, but it's hard. It's hard because the restaurant industry is very fluid. Sometimes you're busy, sometimes you're not. You know, sometimes someone gets sick, you need to be called in right away. You know, sometimes we're open an extra hour or two if you're very busy, and so I do think it can be an unstable environment. You know. When I talk to young people, I say, I don't know, I pushed through it and I ended up having a really good career and I really like it a lot. But so hopefully people will come back to the restaurant business, and, you know, maybe things will shift. And it's very difficult because the waiters get tips and they make a lot of money in New York, and the cooks, you can only afford to pay them so much without breaking the bank and having to close.
Yeah, I can only imagine how tough this whole situation has been. So hopefully things will start to stabilize soon. We do have another question. It says, in your language and culture journey, do you have a most poignant moment or memory of the fusion between language, culture, and vocation?
Well, obviously, I think the whole ramen thing. I mean, I ended up, as I said, I've sort of gone up and down over the years. But you know, when I started the ramen shop, all of a sudden maybe it was the first time in my life that I was actually fully immersed. You know, I would get to the restaurant at 6 a.m. and I'd go home at midnight, and I was either by myself cooking or I was with staff, and then I was with customers, and then I was with vendors, and constantly, I joke with people that I'm one of the only people I know who actually has a job in his major, you know. So it's and it wasn't planned that way, yeah, I think that whole confluence happened when, you know, I had to use this knowledge of culture when I was talking to guests, when I was dealing with vendors, when I was trying to figure out all these things. And all the years of learning about Japan really kicked in and helped quite a bit. And then, you know, the language, all of a sudden I needed the language. You know, I would have a new employee that I would have to, you know, do paperwork with, and then I'd have to train them and teach them and watch them. And it was amazing. I mean, it was really cool. I mean, all of a sudden, all the things I kind of thought I loved came together. I was cooking, and I was talking to people in Japanese. I was navigating Japanese culture, and I was cooking not really Japanese food, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Anything that comes through the border of Japan becomes Japanese. So I guess it's Japanese.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a little bit more about your ramen shop in New York as well. First of all, like how it is different from the one that you had in Japan. And I was really curious about some of the, like, I guess they're be described as fusion items. So you have Coney Island tofu, for example. So can you tell us about, the differences between those two shops?
Well, it's funny. I'm very stubborn about the shop. In Japan, I opened in a neighborhood, far from the center of town. There was no English language menu. There was nothing, I don't think, particularly American about it. And I made no apologies. Some people said, you should open where there's lots of foreigners living, or you should have English speaking people and an English menu. And I was like, no, I don't. I'm in Japan. Why should I do that? I don't care about feeding people who speak English. I mean, they're welcome, but we're a Japanese business. And when I moved back to New York, it was the same. I don't have, I don't have any Japanese writing in my restaurant. I don't have a Japanese menu. I don't pretend. I don't even really pretend. I mean, I think I'm probably listed as a Japanese restaurant, but I don't even really see myself as a Japanese restaurant. I see myself as an Ivan restaurant. And everything I do is Ivan forward. So yes, the tofu Coney Island was, there's miso in it and there's tofu in it, and it's but beyond that, let's put it this way: I never worked in a ramen shop in my life, and I was never taught how to make ramen or any of the dishes. Anything I cook, I made up myself, and so it just is. It has to taste good. I have a few weird rules about the shop. No Southeast Asian ingredients, because there's very few Southeast Asian ingredients used in Japan. It's a pet peeve of mine that a lot of people think Asia is just a big place. It's a big blob in the world somewhere, and all these kind of Asian people live there. And so I find that irritating too. So to me, Japan is Japan. These are the ingredients that Japanese people use. I try to stick mostly to the Japanese ingredients. You might find a little cilantro occasionally, or there's a chili pepper or something, but I try to stick to them. But those are my only real rules. And then I have ramen rules. A good bowl of ramen is balanced. A good bowl of ramen slurps. For those of you who like ramen, understand. A bad bowl of ramen, the noodle texture doesn't match with the soup, and when you try to slurp it, it kind of just won't slurp up into your mouth, or it does slurp, but the soup doesn't really stick to the noodles, so it's kind of this weird bland noodle in your mouth. So I have like rules in my mind about what makes a balanced, good, harmonious bowl of ramen. But they're very, but beyond those rules, we just try to have fun. We're a very hospitality driven restaurant, and when I first decided I wanted to do the ramen shop, I was very disappointed at how many shops were not particularly hospitable. They're very sort of blue collar, salaryman, truck driver, college kid kind of places, dirty, not friendly. I'd walk in there with my children and they would all sneer at me like, oh, great, here comes this guy. He's going to take 4 seats. They're probably only going to get 2 bowls of ramen. What a waste of our time. And I'm very different. Me, you want to order 1 bowl between 10 people? I mean, I'm not happy, but maybe you'll come back and order 20 bowls next time. I don't, to me, it's about the guest having a really good experience. And one of the things that I think I was successful in was I think I was one of the people in the ramen movement to make ramen warmer and more approachable and more accessible. Back in the day when I used to go to ramen shops, when I was young, I mean, you wouldn't find too many women. You didn't see too many kids. You didn't see families, maybe out in the countryside, but not in Tokyo. And I didn't like that. And so I think Ivan Ramen has just kind of grown on that. So Ivan Ramen is even more of like a fine dining restaurant without the tablecloths, without all the pomp and circumstance, but it's warm and friendly and knowledgeable, and should be fun, because I think that ramen in the United States, believe it or not, is still a relatively new food item. And even though in New York, you might roll your eyes and say, oh, what are you talking? There's ramen shops everywhere, but not in other parts of the country. And I think that, part of what I work towards, because for me, and I sometimes say to people that the Ivan Ramen thing is as much about having people take an interest in Japan, because I'm disappointed sometimes. Japan was one of the biggest economies in the world, and people be like, yeah, Japan, where is that? What is that? People wear kimono and geta there, right? And you're like, no. oh, coffee's like $10 a cup. I'm like, no, that was like 1984. That's not what Japan is. And so for me, Ivan Ramen is a way to really get a conversation started about Japan. I'm very proud of Japan. It's not a perfect country, but God only knows America isn't either. So, you know, I've very much embraced Japan, and I like to think that I've helped a lot of people get comfortable with the idea of visiting and being more involved with it, which I think is important.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivan. I think that we are up on time now, so I would like to turn it over to for the wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was so great talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both, Ivan and Jessica, for just a really riveting conversation. I am so hungry right now that I'm gonna go find the closest ramen I can. But thank you so much. This concludes the discussion for the Global Languages Leadership Meeting for this year. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And look for news about the renewal for our grant for the next cycle. Thank you.